Welcome to SportsBeat KC, the Kansas City Star's daily sports podcast. It's Monday, October 10th, and I'm Blair Kirchhoff. The Royals are looking for a new manager. Last week, Mike Matheny and pitching coach Cal Eldred were fired, and the search for replacements is on. Today's SportsBeat KC looks at the process and discusses candidates with beat writer Lynn Worthy and columnists Sam McDowell and Vahe Gregorian. Also, you'll hear part of the press conference conducted by Royals Vice President for Baseball Operations and General Manager J.J. Picollo. Okay, let's get started. We're here with Vahe Gregorian, Sam McDowell, and Lynn Worthy talking Royals. And guys, we got the timing all screwed up last week. The last time we talked Royals was Tuesday afternoon. And of course, we spent that time discussing Mike Matheny's future. And 36 hours later, we knew his future. And he is now no longer manager of the Royals, and Cal Eldred no longer the pitching coach. The move was made on Wednesday after the last regular season game. And I guess I should ask Lynn first. We all had a sense of it, right? But were you? What was your reaction to the news that actually came down around 9 o'clock, I guess, on Wednesday evening?
Yeah, my reaction was that I did not expect the Wednesday night news dump. It was like 9:45 or something like that, and I figured that we'd probably hear something before the weekend, probably hear something before Friday, but I was surprised at how quick it came. But I wasn't surprised that that they made the move that they did with Matheny and then Eldred. I mean, I wouldn't have been totally shocked if they decided to make the move with Eldred and still kept Matheny. But I wasn't surprised that they did what they did either.
Sam, how about you? I think I felt, or you felt like me, or I felt like you about this, that I kind of thought something was going to happen. To me, the origin of this came 3 weeks earlier when J.J. Picollo became the new VP of Baseball Ops and General Manager, replacing Dayton Moore. But what was your reaction?
Yeah, I mean, I think the writing on the wall was there for Mike Matheny, like you mentioned, when there was a change at the guy that was Mike Matheny's biggest backer in Dayton Moore, and that's not to say that JJ and Dayton had these long arguments about Mike Matheny being their manager, but when you are taking over a quote unquote new regime, and I put that in quotes only because JJ's obviously been part of the old regime as well. But you do that for a fresh start, and you don't get that fresh start if you retain the manager and the entire coaching staff.
Vahe, the last two Royals managers were hired as they were hired in the same way. Ned Yost was already hired on to be part of the front office staff when he replaced Trey Hillman, and then Mike Matheny, of course, was part of the Royals front office. It was hired, and in both cases, they seem like managers in waiting. And after we hear a little bit later from J.J. Picollo, we'll talk about the process of the next, selecting the next Royals manager. But, it seemed like those two, the last two Royals managers were guys that Dayton Moore had in mind before he made the decision to fire the sitting manager. And I just wanted to put that out there. So what was your what was your initial thought? I think you maybe been a little more surprised than us that it happened, as it did.
Yeah, I think so, but I think that was kind of illogical for me not to have seen it more clearly, because Lynn had a conversation with Mike Matheny on the phone, and I did later that morning, and I don't remember in quite what order this was said, but Mike said as soon as Dayton was fired, he knew he was basically done. Not just because Dayton was his advocate and brought him in, but because the tenor of everything John Sherman was saying, the whole takeaway was change. And I think you could say, JJ perceives himself and is, I think, intended to be a change agent or whatever that term is, which circles back to the point I think you were starting to make too, Blair, that I'd be really stunned if this comes from within the Royals, the next manager. I mean, just to quickly enunciate that there were only 2 internal candidates, and to immediately emphatically say that there's going to be they're still sending out the net, right? That they're just starting. This was not the culmination of a process. This was the commencement of one. I take them at their word when they say they're extending it out all over. They want to get antenna up everywhere and then start reeling it in. I could be wrong, but I think this will be some weeks till this happens. And I'd sort of be surprised if it's anybody that we're putting our finger on from the outside looking in at the start. I don't think this mechanism is going to work that way. But again, I could be wrong on that.
Okay, those are our first pitches. Let's do this. Let's hear from J.J. Piccolo, the Royals Vice President for baseball operations and general manager. He spoke to the media on Thursday. This all happened so quickly, right? The firing announced Wednesday night, and J.J. Piccolo met the media on Thursday. Here is the first, 8-9 minutes of J.J. Piccolo's more than 30-minute interview with media members. We'll be back after you hear from J.J. Piccolo.
First of all, I just want to say thank you for being here. We appreciate the support, the interest in our club. Obviously, we made the announcement last night that we were moving on from Mike Matheny and Cal Eldred. Their decisions we never take lightly. There's a lot that goes into that. There's a lot of thought. There's a lot of questions that are being asked. There's evaluations that need to take place on where we are as a team, overall, and then also where we are with individual players and their progress in their major league career. Based on those evaluations, we thought the time was right to make that change, as difficult as it was. We respect those 2 men immensely. Mike is a tremendous competitor. His preparation is outstanding. I do think the last 3 years have been challenging for a lot of reasons, which matches the time that Mike was hired. You got COVID in 2020, a lot of logistical things going on in 21. 22, we have the lockout. And when you add all that up, in addition to, I believe it was 29 players who transitioned from the minor leagues to the major leagues, that's a big job. That's a tough job. And I want to acknowledge the appreciation we have for him and how he handled it all. Never complained about a thing. Came to the ballpark every day to win the game, which is really important. And I think that was one of the greatest qualities that Mike has. And we want to wish him well with what he does in the future. A lot of the same can be said for Cal Eldred. Cal was determined to help players get better, in particular pitchers. Always had a smile on his face. There's a determination that he had. Asked a lot of questions himself. And he had a deep care for these players. And he knew what he was up against. Coming into this year, it wasn't easy. To start the year, we had, I believe, 3 out of 5 of our starters were not very experienced. And then as the season went on, a majority of the time, it was 4 out of our 5 starters. And there's a lot that goes into that, and we appreciate the way Cal handled everything. Both of those guys are friends of ours. They'll continue to be friends of ours, and we want to wish them the best of luck in the future. With all that said, I think, from a front office perspective, this is an exciting time. This is when you make a decision like this, we're looking forward to the future. We're looking forward to what's next. We're looking forward to who can we put around our players to make our players better, to lead this organization in a way that's innovative, that's exciting, that meets the needs of players, meets the needs of our front office. And there's a lot of good people out there, and we're just looking forward to diving into it. So with that said, I'll take any questions.
Ginger, you talked about the evaluations that you went through. These last couple of weeks as you've transitioned into the lead of baseball, what did those evaluations look like, and when was the decision made to move on?
So Mike and I had a lot of great discussions the last 2 weeks. Mike understood where we were. I don't want to speak for Mike, but it was very good. It was very open. It was very comforting to know that you had a person in place that understood what the game was about. And, we didn't meet, I'm going to try to avoid the word expectations, as much as I can. But we did have some expectations. So when you look at our record at the end of the season, something went wrong. We should have won more games than we did. There are a lot of factors that go into that. It's not just Mike himself. There's, myself, our front office. We're all accountable for that. But we expected to be a little bit further along than we were. And we can't, avoid that that's the case.
As you look forward now into hiring a new manager, what are the qualities that you're looking for in that person?
Well, we're working on, I'll call it criteria. We're working on the criteria right now, but we certainly need somebody that's collaborative in nature, recognizes all the departments that we have in place. Over the last 5 years, there's been a lot of efforts to expand who we are and what we're about, whether that be performance science or research and development department that has been in place, but it continues to grow. Behavioral science is a big part of what we do. So those efforts that have been made over the last 5 years, this new manager is going to have to recognize that, appreciate it, and figure out a way to put it all into play. How do we pull it all together? And that's why it's going to take some time to find the right person.
If you look at the criteria, what are the cases that you would make for already in the organization versus or new fresh voices out of the organization? I mean, do you have to think that through in your matrix of stuff?
Yeah, I think there's some organizations that clearly are driven by multiple departments, like I'm speaking of. But what we have to be careful of is we don't overlook others. There are people in every organization in baseball that are very talented. So we're going to cast a wide net and narrow it down. And as we build out what we think are the most important ingredients to being a manager for the Kansas City Royals, I couldn't tell you which organization it's going to come from. That's kind of why this is in some ways exciting right now.
JJ, you guys want to hire a manager. They have to want to come here too. What's your selling point about this organization in the future?
We've got a good core here. We have work to do on our roster, but we've got a good core. I mean, if you look at our rotation, they do have a little bit of experience now. Now, how that all shakes out in the long run, I would think that there's a manager out there and a pitching coach out there that are excited when they see what our staff looks like. And then, of course, offensively, our lineup is very young. I think we started 7 guys again yesterday that were rookies. I mean, so, we don't know where all their careers are going, but there's a core there that's pretty good, and I would think will be very attractive to a lot of people.
JJ, what's the current status? I mean, obviously you guys made this announcement with the pitching coach and manager. The current staff, the rest of them, what's the current status right now?
Yeah, so there are a lot of the... Let me start with the people that will definitely stay in place. Will be our hitting department. Alex Zumwalt, Keone Duran, Mike Tozar, and Damon Hollins will remain as our first base coach. Pedro Grifol is a candidate for this job. Vance Wilson is a candidate for this job. So we'll see where that goes. And the way this is going to play out, the priority is to hire a manager first. The manager will have some influence and say in who the pitching coach is. And as you get those pieces in place, it'll determine the remainder of our staff. So that's the order of events for us.
As you've talked about, obviously you don't want to overlook other organizations and where you might find somebody. What sort of, value, if any, do you place on just the familiarity with so many young guys who just transitioned to the major leagues and there being some in-house people who have that familiarity?
It's a benefit. Quite honestly, it's a benefit I'm enjoying right now, or I'm the beneficiary of, because I know our organization well. So there's reason to look at that and consider that. Our players have a great deal of respect, really, for every one of our coaches. So I think they'd be excited if it ends up being one of our own guys. The transition may be a little bit quicker, but we're going to go through a thorough process. We're not going to jump into this and say this is our target. We don't have a main target. And I shared that with Pedro and Vance, which they appreciate. We're going to go through this process, and at the end of the day, we're going to make the best decision that we can make.
Hey, this is Blair. There are several ways to access the Star Sports section. Let me tell you about a couple of them. There is Sports Pass. For $12.99 a month, you get unlimited digital access to all of the Star Sports content, including beat writing, columns, features, pretty much everything we write. The deal renews monthly until you tell us to cancel. For $159.99 a year, you get everything the Star has to offer digitally, including sports and the e-edition. Go to kansascity.com and drop down to the bottom of the page where it says Start a Subscription for more information. Your support has never been more important. As always, thanks for reading and listening. Okay, we're back on SportsBeat KC, talking Royals and the manager situation with Lynn Worthy, Sam McDowell, and Vahe Gregorian. You just heard from JJ Piccolo. I thought there were some interesting insights there. He said, in one way, it's kind of exciting, and it is, right? I mean, it's you're starting over at manager, and the first part of it, of course, was explanation why it happened. The team should have won more games than it did, of course, and expected to be further along than they were. And where the Royals were last place in the AL Central. Only a record only better than the Oakland A's in the American League this year. So it absolutely was a disappointing season for the Royals. But let's start with the two names that he mentioned. I know, Vahe, you just said you'd be surprised before we heard from JJ that if they went internal, but he identified Pedro Grifol and Vance Wilson as candidates that are on the staff now. Also said he were keeping some of the coaches, but you said. How about just amplifying that a little bit? Why would you be surprised if it came from either Pedro Grifol or Vance Wilson?
Really, just because I don't think they fit the model of what I believe the job description to be in some ways, and that's a little ambiguous, I realize, but I just think that the profile I feel like I'm getting in my mind is somebody late 30s, early 40s. Sort of new wave in a lot of ways, and also I think at least symbolically wanting some change, some element of change. Just those things, make my spider sense feel like that's not what these two guys would represent. And I'd love to hear Sam or Lynn dispute that or challenge that point, because I might really just have a warped view of it.
Yeah, I think it's an opportunity. Go ahead, Lynn.
No, I was going to say, as far as the first thing is the reason that I think he specifically mentioned those two is they were both candidates the last time around when Matheny was hired, and they've both been candidates in other jobs. Now, one of the names that's been rumored, the bench coach from Tampa Bay, I'm going to mess up the last name, Quatero. And the more I look, and I don't know in depth his background, but the more I look at his background, it seems to me really similar to Pedro Grifol, except for the fact that the organizations that, unless you're just latching on to the fact that he's, worked in the Indians and Tampa Bay, the Guardians and Tampa Bay's organizations. The things that people talk about him is he's a communicator. He worked player development. He worked on the hitting side. Pedro Grifol, was a scout, was a minor league manager, worked as a player development head, field coordinator, then came over to the Royals and worked as in the minor leagues, and then as a hitting coach, quality control coach, bench coach. Quintero worked in other organizations, had a lot of similar types of things. He was also a former catcher, just like Pedro, with his highest AAA, just like Pedro. He's talked about as being a communicator, just like Pedro. So I'm not sure, and they were actually up for some of the same jobs in the past. Pedro was one of the last 3 or 4 guys that was in the running for the San Francisco Giants job. And you think of the Giants, or at least the way that people look at them, is that they're this, analytically forward-thinking organization, because Farhan Zahidi, who came from Oakland, is the one who's in charge of things there, and the way they do things with their analytics, the staff, the big major league staff with all these different coaches looking at every angle. He was one of the last guys that was still in the running for that job when they hired Gabe Kapler. And I talked to Farhan the winter meetings right after that, and he was glowing about Pedro and actually said, I hope that he does get a chance to become a manager in the near future. And obviously there was he already had a previous connection with Gabe Kapler. So as far as the profile, I don't think that there's a big difference between Pedro and at least, a guy like Quatero, who's been named, has been floated out there as maybe the top guy, other than the organizations. But in the same light, you look at Pedro and say, well, he's got familiarity with this organization, with these players. He's had success working with guys one-on-one, bilingual. And as far as Vance, obviously Vance has worked in different aspects of, baseball in terms of he's had that third base coach job. He worked with the pitching staff because he was the bullpen coordinator, minor league manager, and has worked, throughout the organization. And obviously he was a former big leaguer. So I think I don't think we should overlook some of their things just because, obviously people will look at all the guys from the outside and say, oh, this guy can bring this guy can bring that. We still need to consider what the guys inside bring.
The other thing they have in common is they both worked for teams that we're talking about Quatero and Pedro Gafal that John Sherman oversaw in some way, right? Sherman with the Indians when he was a part owner and now, of course, the owner of the Royals. So, Sam, whoever gets the job, what are they getting? What kind of team are they going to get when they take over? And what? Why should there be optimism about a new regime in Kansas City?
Well, I think it's a pretty good job, and for a couple of reasons. But mainly, and this actually applies to the pitching coach as well. The Royals, you mentioned it, finished last in the division, the second worst record in the American League. It's hard. It'll be hard for the Royals not to improve at least slightly on 97 losses next year. Who's going to get credit for that? The changeover is going to get credit for that. It'll be hard not to improve on a historically bad pitching staff next year in terms of walk rate, strikeout rate, ERA, hits allowed. Who's going to get credit for that? The people that are new. The pitch, because the players are going to, I think, largely remain the same. Now, they could add, but I don't think it's going to be anything, super significant. I don't think we're looking at like an off-season James Shields like trade to where we're going to be saying, okay, well, yeah, but this manager, this pitching coach was aided by all these new guys that the last regime didn't have. So I think that's number one, is that there's room for improvement. But number two is you're working with a really young group. And, I just think that would be attractive for somebody coming in who wants to be, one, more of a teacher, and also two, the Royals are targeting, according to JJ Piccolo in that clip that we played, they're targeting guys who are going to be invested in connecting their departments. And when JJ Piccolo says that, he means the analytics, the research, implementing all the stuff that they feel like they're already doing. But John Sherman specifically said it at Dayton Moore's press conference that they want more of that implemented into their decision making. Well, I think that the younger generation is going to be more receptive to receiving that kind of information. And that's the group that the Royals have. They've got a lot of players that are around this, 25-year-old range that I think is going to be eager to receive some of that information and wonder how to apply it. And I think the best example of that is, when Drew Waters came over to the organization, he basically said, I know I'm not hitting how I want to hit, and I am all ears to what you guys have for me. You guys acquired me for a reason. What do you got for me? And Drew Waters had a fantastic finish to the season after the Royals acquired him, both in the minors and the major leagues. And I think you're going to have a clubhouse of guys that are eager for information like that. And here's an opportunity to be the guy that's delivering it to them. In some cases, perhaps delivering some new information to them for the first time.
Should we add Alex Zumwalt to the list of potential candidates, in-house candidates? Even though JJ didn't identify him, he identified only Pedro and Vance. But
no, I asked him if those were the only two internal candidates in the entire organization, and he said yes. So he specifically said the hitting coaches will remain in place, as are.
What's interesting about Alec, just real quick, Blair, and Sam and I, and I think Lynn and I, or three of us have kicked this around a little bit, is Sam articulated this better than I will, but he has a certain reach across the organization right now that I don't think they want to lose. And then I guess the other thing is, though, I would think if Alec was interested in the job, they would certainly have mentioned him So one way or another, it doesn't seem that he has come to a place where he's decided that's what he wants to do. But again, I'd love to hear what you guys say about that.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, the fact that, like Sam said, that JJ specifically said that those were the only two internal, and that they're keeping the hitting department in place as far as at the major league level, means that he's going to stay doing what he's doing. And even going back to when they made that change, I mean, I think it was JJ who was pretty adamant at the fact that, like, that was never the idea, was for him to even be a major league hitting coach. That was not, they didn't put him in that position thinking that he would eventually elevate to that, when he became the director of hitting performance. So I think they want him, and I think that especially with some of those young guys, whether that's the Drew Waters or the MJ Melendez, Bobby Witt Jr., a lot of those guys, even Nicky Lopez, who Zumi is one of those people. We go back to last year when they sent Nicky down, and he came right back up because Monty got hurt. One of the people who he's talked with to sort of get himself back on track, who sat in the room with JJ and Zumi to sort of like get himself, back in line. But I think they believe that those guys want Zumi in the dugout, but I don't think there's any move to try and push him into that manager's role.
Well, they need a pitching Zumi, don't they? Someone to come in and be the catalyst for change on that side of baseball. That, to me, am I wrong about this? The biggest challenge facing the new manager is to get this pitching staff in order. And Sam, I know you mentioned that you don't necessarily see a James Shield type trade in the offseason. I don't know about that. I don't. We discussed this last week, or maybe it was a couple weeks ago. I can't remember now, but it's hard to come up with a rotation for next season based on the way this year and the second half especially unfolded. Once you get past, and that's assuming they side Greinke, once you get past Singer and Greinke, and maybe Brad Keller goes back to the rotation. But I just, that to me is job one of this. You just assume the new hire is going to be, create a culture that's, that players will connect with. But just from a practical standpoint, they got to get pitching fixed.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the more surprising things from JJ Piccola's press conference is, that Paul Gibson and that group is all going to stay in their current roles. And he did say they're going to supplement people alongside those guys. But his reasoning is pretty sound on that, because I know that caught a lot of people's attention. And he said, look, Paul Gibson's job is to get these guys to the major leagues. And the Royals have not really had kinks in getting these guys to the major leagues. It's once they arrive that they're not able to replicate. And I mean, heck, I wrote about this, I think in May, that these guys dominate and in Omaha in the minor leagues. They even dominate as soon as they come up in the major leagues, and then they're just not able to sustain it. There's just a lack of consistent performance. Brady Singer is unfortunately the only exception really to that rule among, that draft class. And so, you could point to, okay, well, they switched over the major league coaches. But I do think that there's got to be more processes changed. And, we could get really into the weeds on that. But I think there's going to be some pretty high-level people hired during this offseason that supplements what the Royals are doing in the minor leagues to try and make sure that they're not just pitching for success in the minor leagues. They're pitching, for ways that set them up for success in the major leagues.
Well, and to piggyback on that, Sam, and also a clarification. So Paul Gibson, as the senior director of pitching, is going to be in place, but sort of the Drew Saylor to Alex Zumwalt's, Drew Saylor is the hitting coordinator under Alex Zumwalt. The person under Gibby is going to be a new person because Jason Simon-Tachi, we know, is out. So there's going to be at least one new person there. And they've talked about whether that's an analytics person or somebody along those lines working on pitch design type stuff, may potentially adding something along those lines. And I wouldn't be surprised once they get the manager job straightened out, and then they're going to go to the pitching coach, if there's going to be other major league staff almost again like the hitting department, where right now you're looking at Zumi, Mike Tozar, Keone Duran, all on the hitting side, and you could throw, at least this past year, you would throw John Mabry in there. We're not sure if he's going to be back or not, but more coaches along that line, a more similar dynamic on the major league staff on the pitching side too. So I think there will be changes, and while Gibson will be staying in place. JJ said that. I think there's definitely going to be changes in the major league side on that staff, and also at the top under Gibson on the player development side.
Just to go back to something you said too, Blair, and look, I don't know if they'll do this or not, whether it's a trade or a signing, but I feel like it's incumbent on them to make a significant pitching acquisition or two. However they do it, whether it means they identify that's a place to spend some money, I don't know, but they've got to. I feel like right now they're only guessing if they think this group's going to be giving them a better chance next year than it's given them this year.
I think if you make that kind of move, you're like signaling that you think this is the year. And I don't know what we saw from this team in 2022 that makes me think that like 2023 is the year for the Royals to compete. That it's the year to sacrifice maybe a prospect. They sacrificed huge prospects to get James Shields, for example. They gave up Will Myers, still in the major leagues. Jake Odorizzi, still in the major leagues. Montgomery was part of that trade, right? Right, Len? Closed out a World Series for another team. So I just don't think that the Royals are at that place to where if they make that kind of deal, all of a sudden we're talking about them winning. I think that year after they made that trade, they won over 82 games, right? It was like 86 maybe or something like that. I don't see the Royals being one move away from winning 86 games. I think maybe in 2 years they could be in that place, and certainly they need to fill out the rotation. But to me, if I'm the general manager of the Royals, like most of my moves are targeting, hey, this young group just got their first season. A lot of the guys half of a season or less when you talk about, Vinny Pasquantino, Eaton, Massey, Drew Waters. Those guys are just half a season into their major league careers. And so I still think this team is a year and a half away from actually being able to ready to compete. And my moves in this offseason would reflect that timeline.
I don't disagree with that point, which is why I think maybe they need to spend money instead of prospects in some way. But the thing I feel sort of concerned about for them is you've got this vibrant group of you guys that are going to be your core unit on the field for the next couple, 3 years, right? And if they come out of the blocks again they get one good start every week, I just think they need something to prime the pump or jumpstart that season. I tell you what, they can ill afford an April and May that says, yeah, they're out of it again. And so I think in a way this will be another interesting checkpoint on how John Sherman's going to do things. Whether there's more money to be spent now, even as he's come through a couple where least attendance since 1975 and a COVID year and all that. That's a lot to ask. On the other hand, he's taken a jump here from being patient, as he put it, to the sense of urgency now. So anyway, we'll see. It's the question of the offseason, I think, Sam. The way you express it really, I think, makes the other point really well.
Well, and I'm not sure that I think that I don't think you're looking at a big prospect type trade, a la James Shields. I don't know that that's what you would look for this offseason. I think it's probably more likely to spend, but I don't think you're talking about spending big money, because I just don't see them doing that. I think it's more along the lines of the Zach Greinke thing, where it's like, okay, a guy that you can just count on to give you innings and be some sort of stability, as opposed to the young guys that there's just so much variance and up and down. And because even with Greinke, you can count on him and their stability, but he did not make it through the full season. He pitched most of the season, and then he had those ups, those moments where he ran into trouble just because he's 38-year-old pitcher and had the forearm issues and things like that. So even with those guys, you're going to have to sort of be able to fill in for those guys some too. But if you're filling in for those guys with coming from that group of, Heasley and Marsh and whoever else, that's one thing. But if that's the group that you're counting on, and then you're trying to fill in for that group when they have hiccups with more of those guys, that's a whole different story. Whereas I think if they can find somebody, the question is going to be, what can they find out there that's going to be more consistent, give you something more stable than the young guys, and also is not going to be big cost, because I don't think they're, and JJ had the comment in that press conference where somebody asked about that, and he said he gave the old, I think it's really almost like a line that we remember Dayton saying back in the Glass days about when it's time, they'll be willing to spend.
Yeah, just to clarify too, I'm not trying to suggest something blockbustery, right? I'm just thinking something substantial enough that says, okay, we're going to be stable. We see this move or two as stabilizing and giving us a chance.
Okay, Vahe got the final word in, as he always seems to do. Yep. All right, great conversation, guys, with Linworthy, Sam McDowell, and Vahe Gregorian. Follow the coverage of the Royals and the managerial search in the print editions of the Kansas City Star online at kansascity.com. That'll do it for today. Thanks to our SportsBeat KC production staff of Monty Davis, Randy Mason, George Howard, and Jeff Rosen. Tip of the cap to Linworthy, Vahe Gregorian, and Sam McDowell for sharing their insights. Morning Sports Edition was 48 pages today, full of baseball playoff coverage, the NFL, college football, the weekend in auto racing, and so much more. Check it out at liveedition.kansascity.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with another SportsBeat KC.